Hello everybody, this is General Yanis, and today in General Yanis Tactics, the Warhammer 40k channel, tainted by chaos and Nurgle, and also a little bit by change. Today we will be looking at the Thousand Suns Codex and the Mutalith Vortex Beast, reviewing this monster of heavy support unit for the Thousand Suns. So with no further ado, let's get started. So today is the 12th of October. I will play a 50 PL Crusade game with 1,000 Suns today. So looking forward to see what they can do in a Crusade setting. So as I said, today 1,000 Suns, heavy support, the Mutalith Vortex Beast, a cool looking model, a bit expensive also to buy. In this video, I will be reviewing the stats and weapons, the damage output, the durability, comparing it to other units, and then some buffs, combos, some specific uses, ending with final thoughts and summary. Big thanks to all my patrons for your support and all my supporters. As I said last time, more than 4,000 followers in YouTube. Really appreciated. So let's get started on the Mutalith Vortex Beast. So here we have the base stats and the weapons of the Mutalith Vortex Beast. The Vortex Beast is 145 points. It has a degrading profile starting with 14 wounds, and in the top bracket it has a nice move of 10 inches, 3+ weapon skill, 4+ ballistic skill that it doesn't really use, strength 7, toughness 7, 5 attacks in melee, 7 leadership, only a 4+ save, let's say. And in the in the top bracket, it can use 2 vortex powers. If it loses half its wounds, it goes to 1 vortex power, and then very degraded, it cannot throw a vortex power, and the movement and weapon skill degrade with the wounds. The Vortex Beast has equipped the beaten tackled maw and the Mutalith claws. The claws is its heavy attack weapon, so here you will have 5 attacks with strength 8, AP -2, damage 3. The beaten tackled maw is strength 7, AP -1, damage 1, but it can do 3 hit rolls instead of 1. So this is like you can do a lot of attacks, 15 attacks by using this profile. So it's good against hordes and one wound targets. The keywords are the normal Thousand Suns keywords. It also is part of a great cult, and it is a monster and not a vehicle, which gives some interesting possibilities. And then instead of shooting weapons, it has the vortex. So in the shooting phase, it can attempt to use vortex powers, and it has 4 vortex powers to select from. And as I said, you can use as many vortex powers as the profile says here. So two of the vortex powers, and you can only use one. Use each once, and if you have multiple mutaliths, then if one casts immaterial flare, for example, then the other one cannot use it. So basically, this means you probably get best use of one, and if you have too many, they will be struggling to find some good vortex powers to throw. I'll get through those in more detail when we come in the damage output section. Additionally, the unit has a 5+ invul save, and it has a nice regeneration. It regenerates D3 lost wounds at the start of the command phase, and it is high explosive. If it's killed, it can explode on 4+, dealing D3 mortal wounds within 6 inches. So a vortex shooting and melee options monster, and the monster, as I said, very good for example, the Duplicity Cult, which allows you to teleport him with a Sorcerous Facade power, for example. Now, looking at the melee damage output, here we are comparing the damage output of a B-tentacled maw, where you have 15 attacks, and the Mutalith claws, where you have 5 attacks with a damage 3 weapon. So we see, as expected, the claws are better versus tough opponents with multiple wounds, like Imperial Knights or Predator tanks and other tanks, etc. For wound 1 models, the B-tentacled maw, the blue lines, they are better against, for example, Battle Sisters or Gene Stealers or Harlequins and Tau, Necro Warriors, Orcs, what have you, everything that's one wound, of course, you would have a better success doing multiple attacks. The Mutalith Claws better, as I said, versus heavier, tougher opponents with multiple wounds. Looking at death cards, specifically here, death card targets, we see that the Mutalith Claws are not as good here because most of the death card units reduce the damage taken by one, and therefore the Beat-Tentacled Maw becomes more interesting, for example, against something like Blightlord Terminators or the Plague Marines. Yeah, so Mutalith Claws in general, the better weapon, but with versus death card and one wound models, the Beat-Tentacled Maw with multiple attacks seems to be the best option. Now let's look at the Vortex Powers, so which is kind of its shooting. It doesn't have any shooting weapons, but it has these Vortex Powers. So it has, as I said, 4 different types. The first is the immaterial flare. You have to select an enemy unit within 18 inches, and it has to be visible. Then you throw a d6 for each model, and all the 6s do mortal wounds. And of course, this is good against a horde type enemy unit with multiple models. And here we can see the expected mortal wounds on the model count of the unit. So for a big unit of 20 enemy models, you will be doing three something mortal wounds on average. If it's a small unit, you get 1 mortal wound on average or less. So it's not super good versus the multiple small units. If you have Marines or something that normally elite type enemies, they have five models max in a unit, then the material flare is not as good. If you play against something like Orcs and they have 20-man Orc boys, it could be okay. Then we have the turbulent discharge. I think this is the overall the best damage output it can have. But it goes to the closest enemy and visible unit within 18 inches, so it's basically like a smite. On a 2, you throw 1 dice. On a 2 to 4, the enemy suffers d3 mortal wounds. On a 5+, you deal 3 mortal wounds, and the average damage output of all this becomes 2 mortal wounds. So I think this is basically the baseline, the best option he has versus a variety of targets. But of course, if the opponent has very multiple more models than 10, 11, 12 something, then it's better to use the immaterial flare. The Maelstrom of Madness, you deal it so that within 9 inch of the Mutalith Vortex Beast, every enemy on a 2+ will be getting 1 mortal wound. So the damage output of this one depends on how many units are within the 9 inches of the Vortex Beast. If you have only 1, then you typically you will be dealing 0.8 mortal wounds on average. If you have 2-3 units, it starts to get interesting. If it's close to a melee, if it can come close to a big castle of the enemy, this could be an interesting power to use. And then the Beam of Unreality, the last one, an enemy model within 24 inches and visible, so this has the biggest range, and you have to select a model that has 10 or more wound characteristics, so typically good against heavy opponents, enemy vehicles, like Primarchs, characters, etc., that have a lot of wounds. And then you throw dice. On a 3 to 4, you deal d3 mortal wounds. On a 5+, you deal d6 mortal wounds. For Titanic enemies, you get +1 to this roll. For aircraft, you get -1 to this roll. So in normal occasions, for a normal, let's say 10+ wound model, you will be dealing 1.8 mortal wounds, a Titanic 2.4 mortal wounds, and an aircraft 1.25 mortal wounds. So all in all, I think the Turbulent Discharge overall does the best damage output, and then depending if there is enemy hordes or many enemies close to the Mutalith Vortex Beast or some strong target, you can select one of the 3 others. If we assume that the Mutalith Vortex Beast has 2 powers available to it, 2 Vortex Powers, should be able to do 2 mortal wounds with this one, maybe 2 more with the other ones, depending on the situation. So at least 3 mortal wounds, probably 4 mortal wounds on average, which can be quite good, especially against the enemies that have high invul saves and that don't have a very big protection against mortal wounds. So summarizing then, a shooting damage output comparison, point corrected baseline. So in this graph we are seeing a 5-man Scarabo Cult Terminators with a Soul Reaper cannon and the Hellfire missile. The blue line is the damage output versus a variety of targets. Here we have a shooty Forge Fiend with 2 autocannons and the Ectoplasma that can shoot at 24-inch. Here we have the Hellbrute, a mixed configuration with the gray, with the multi-melta and the fist. And then you see the variety of this, the distribution of the damage for these 3 other units. And here, as illustrated by this blue band here, between 2 and 3 mortal wounds, point corrected here to 100 points. Here is the mortal wounds damage output of the Mutalith Vortex Beast. So it's quite good, especially against very tough opponents with mortal wounds, multiple targets. It can do quite a lot of damage, up there with let's say where the Terminators would be. So summarizing, I think with the 2 Vortex Powers, the Mutalith Vortex Beast has a decent range damage output. Yeah, also for example with Death Guard it's quite good doing mortal wounds and avoiding the disgusting resilience. And this damage here could be higher depending on the situation. If you are facing, let's say, orcs where you can use with many models you can do more mortal wounds, and strong titanic unit you can do more mortal wounds, etc. Now switching attention to the durability. Here we see the Mutalith Vortex Beast baseline durability that's not point corrected. So this shows a variety of weapons and how many shots of each weapon it takes to kill the Mutalith Vortex Beast. The Mutalith Vortex Beast with 14 wounds, toughness 7, and 5+ invul is not an easy target to take out. So you compared to, for example, the Hellbrute here, a Forge Fiend or a Mauler Fiend, or the Contemptor Dread, it can take more heavy weapon shots before taking out, due to it has 14 wounds. All of them have basically a toughness 7 and a 5+ invul, and here we see that basically it has the highest number of wounds. Not as durable as the Plagueburst Crawler with a toughness 8, disgusting resilience, etc., but close to a Defiler and costing a, let's say, cheaper weapon. So with 14 wounds, it can take quite a beating from the typical heavy weapons on the table. It's a bit more vulnerable to some other vehicles or heavy support units because it has only a 4+ base save. So AP0 weapons, it's saving on a 4+ instead of a 3+. But to counteract this, it has also a high regeneration rate of D3 wounds per turn. So it could heal more easier than the other targets, than the other vehicles here. So summarizing now damage output and comparing to the other units and the durability here, we see here the Thousand Suns heavy support vehicles and dreadnoughts, the Mutalith Vortex Beast, 145 points. This is let's say the mortal wound damage output it would be able to do on average against, let's say, some variety of targets here, around 2 mortal wounds per 100 points. This is the average of all the General Yanis 31 targets per 100 points. In melee, the optimal profile using what's best for the situation with multiple attacks of the maw instead of the claw. It also has a nice damage output in melee, and it has a good durability per 100 points, both for the anti-infantry weapons and also the anti-vehicle weapons. So it's more durable versus heavy fire than Scarable Cult Terminators or the Mauler Fiend and the Forge Fiend. Here it can take more shots on average. And the damage output, let's say, is comparable to a Hellbrute with a multi-melta and a fist. Of course, the Hellbrute is a core and can be buffed further, but it's quite good compared, let's say, to Forge Fiend and a Mauler Fiend. It's more on all-rounder and has a better durability than the Forge Fiend and the Mauler Fiend, dealing mortal wounds instead of normal shooting damage. So Good durability per point and with a high regeneration rate, decent baseline damage output, even compared to the Scarab Cult Terminators. The Scarab Cult Terminators can do better damage output. They are core, they are objective secure, but they could complement, the Vortex Beast can complement adding some mortal wounds, adding something new to the table, and being able maybe to draw some fire more effectively away from the Scarab Cult Terminators. And all in all, it seems like a more all-rounder than the Forge Fiend and the Mauler Fiend. Moving on to some selected buffs and combos and maybe some interesting use. I think as a monster and not a vehicle, it can have an interesting interaction with the Cult of Duplicity. You can redeploy it, and yeah, within 9 inches on the back of your opponent's line, and yeah, become a threat. So the Cult of Duplicity, the Sorcerous Facade, teleport it behind enemy lines, redeploy it 9 inches away from enemies, use the Vortex Powers, and then maybe to make a charge, be a melee threat, and take fire away from the opponents. Yeah, instead of that hitting your Terminators. You have access to 2 stratagems to use with the Mutalith Vortex Beast. They are basically supporting the Psykers. So with Etheric Saturation, a Psyker character can heal D3 wounds if it's within 6 inches of a Mutalith Vortex Beast, instead of casting 1 Psychic Power. The Empiric Reservoir at the start of the Psychic phase, then you can use a model within 6 inches of the Vortex Beast, can generate D3 extra Cabal points, could be helpful towards maybe the end of the game, trying to get a bit more Cabal points if some of your sorcerers have been killed. As I said, Psychic Powers, the Sorcerous Facade is very strong, using on the Mutalith Vortex Beast. And then we have the normal buffing, let's say, buffing Psychic Powers, Blessings, +1 to hit, could increase its melee damage. The Weaver of Fates to give it a 4+ invul, increasing further its durability. The Glamour of Change, -1 to be hit. This will allow it to take on average 33% more shots than I showed you on the table before. And Swelled by the Warp, quite interesting, would be giving a +2 strength to the melee damage output, +1 attack. That would translate to 34% more damage output in melee. So it will be doing 18 attacks with a maw and 6 attacks with its claws, and at higher strength. So, reaching to the summary and the final thoughts, I think the Mutalith Vortex Beast is very interesting and a thematically fitting unit for the Thousand Suns, a bit unique unit for them, and I believe that taking one in the list would benefit in many Thousand Suns lists, adding something a bit different than the other units of the Thousand Suns. It can add its Vortex Powers, adding mortal wound ranged output that's not Psychic Powers. With the Cult of Duplicity, you can basically make it a teleporting monster threat on the table. You are putting 14 very durable wounds on the table with a high regeneration rate. It has a good melee damage output with 2 profiles. Basically, it can help against elite opponents and horde type opponents, and it has also the support. It can support the Psykers with stratagems. I don't see any big benefit in having more than one, because the Vortex Powers you can only use them once each. So one of them I would believe would benefit a lot of lists, and not more than one. Adding something else and maybe drawing fire away from some of your other targets like Terminators. It's better than the multi-melta hits the Mutalith Vortex Beast than taking out a Terminator, I would assume. So basically, I think I need to get one to my upstarting Thousand Suns collection. So with these words, this concludes the video. What do you think about the Mutalith Vortex Beast? How have you been using it? Have you had success using it? And do you find that it complements the quite infantry Terminators and rubric heavy Thousand Suns lists? If you like this video, please press like and subscribe to my channel, where I will be bringing you deep dive analysis on multiple units. The channel is mostly focused on Death Guard and now Thousand Suns. If you want to support my efforts further, please visit my Patreon page, patreon.com General Yanis. And with these words, General Yanis is saying goodbye, signing out. Stay safe out there, and bye bye.